I am going to put on my stopwatch so I can keep an eye on things. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. I've been nominated to talk really on behalf of engagement and wellbeing and the early years and child development area. And I'm sort of in the Wave 1 universal, but also describing some of the targeted programs. And then the later panels will actually go into more some of the depth around functional needs and some of the specific interventions and work that's taking place in that area. And I'm really pleased to have Julie and Majek on the panel, and I'm really interested to hear some of the practical stuff that they're going to share with us that goes with some of the broader policy and program areas that I'm going to talk about. And I need to get going. So our purpose was really just to scope the general needs and challenges. So even though Caroline was talking about the 1 in 4, you know, my interest and the interest of all of us is every student, and how do we make sure we build the best possibilities and prevent and early intervene when we can, but then also provide that tailored support when we can as well. And I'm going to cover some of the policy and program areas that cover that. And this will probably be really familiar to all of you. I've got the student at the centre. And then there's a range of programs. So there's the attendance, there's some of the child protection and wellbeing trauma programs. I actually lead on mental health and wellbeing. I've been in the department for a year as the senior advisor on mental health and wellbeing, but I'm also doing broader work around policy and strategy as well. Then there's the functional needs and all the behaviour support as well. And I noticed that whilst they sort of appear there as satellites circling around the student, that in fact the galaxy around that student obviously includes their families, other agencies, and that's really important, that there's quite a lot of overlap and that those circles are actually more intersected. So work you do in trauma impacts on mental health and wellbeing, impacts on behaviour. So they're not as discrete as what we sometimes try to picture in our policy and programs. And that's a challenge for all of us as well, when we find out, oh, you're also doing work on that really is going to impact on wellbeing, and we may not always be aware of everything going on in other people's space as well. I'm going to do 3 slides on data. So the first one is sort of general demographic data. So the information I was given was that there's about 177,000 students across 509 schools. 30% of those students are enrolled in category 1 to 3 schools, and 71% in metro areas. The functional needs, 12% of students have a disability on the last Term 1 census. I'm looking at Lindley to try to make sure I get the terminology right. And in the NCCD, 31% were receiving some sort of adjustments on the basis of their disability. So that's the scope, and so that about a third were actually getting adjustments. In addition, I think what's really important is that there's approximately 2,500 students in care, which is 60% of children in care are actually enrolled in government schools. And clearly these populations, again, overlap. So some of the students who've got disabilities are children in care who are also hopefully getting additional support for that as well. And then 8% of students identify as Aboriginal. And again, there's going to be overlap between those, particularly those in care and those who are also Aboriginal. So that's sort of some of the broad demographics about who are the students in our schools, and what are some of their needs just universally that we need to pay attention to, but also make sure that we do some of that general building development work that often takes place through curriculum as well. It does take place through curriculum. My focus particularly, I've been doing quite a lot of work around student mental health and wellbeing, which isn't a passion. I'll try not to talk too long about this. But what we know is from the national survey is that about 1 in 7 students between the age of 4 and 7 have some sort of diagnosed mental health disorder. So that's from a national survey. We do see this, and I'm certainly getting increasing reports from our schools as well. So if you look at the ERMS reports down the bottom, you'll see that there's been quite a large increase in reports of self-harm and suicidal ideation, and that comes through as a critical incident reporting system. The Swiss reported incidents, 44% of those are for mental health concerns. And I think one of the interesting stats from the Social Work Incident Support Team report is that Year 7 is the highest number where suicidal ideation is reported. And we can talk a lot about adolescent development as being a really important, puberty is known to be an important time when mental health issues can emerge. And so year 7's a really important time, and given the context of transition and things happening at the moment, I think the wellbeing support universally of all those students is really important as well. I put the child protection reports in because the Telethon Institute did a study that showed about 1 in 4 children under 10 in South Australia will have at least one child protection report, but of those, only about 20% will be allocated. And the other really interesting thing is that there's a very close link between a child protection report, or what we might call, and I think Julie will talk about adverse childhood experiences, between having those experiences and then having mental health disorders. And the more child protection contact you have, by the time if you actually take into care, you're very likely to have an emerging mental health disorder in middle years. And last year there were about 39,000 notifications to DCP that were accepted as notifications. Not all of those would be in state schools, but you can see there's a huge number of children and young people, and it really does impact on the developmental issues in the early years. So I think the early years strategy is going to be one of the really important places that we need to focus on. And then the student attendance, and Trish Hall is here. I asked her to come in case there were any tricky questions around some of the attendance space. She's looking at me not very happily. But the COVID data for 2020, the data for 2020 clearly was impacted by COVID, so it does require a little bit of interpretation. But generally around 90% of students are attending school or authorised to be absent from school. And if I get this wrong, because it's actually, the terminology is relatively complicated. So it means there's about 3% who are absent from school without any authorised explanation. There may be an explanation for that, but it's just that explanation hasn't been provided to the school, or the school hasn't sought that information or been able to get that information. The rates of increase, and this won't surprise any of you, that they increase with the level of disadvantage. It's higher in country areas, and it's higher amongst Aboriginal students as well. And there is quite a large, I'll talk about some of the program areas in a minute, but there's quite a much more focused attention on attendance and how we can be making sure all students are engaged in their learning, because we know even authorised absences any days away from school has really impact on the learning and engagement in learning as well. So I've just got a few slides, and where am I in my time? 7 minutes, not too bad. Hopefully I'm not talking too quickly. To talk about some of the broad policy areas and then some of the specific programs and interventions and supports available. I'm going to particularly highlight things that might be newer, because some of these programs have been around quite a long time. And there'll be opportunities in your table discussion later if there's things that I've missed or you're aware of that aren't included here for you to share with others if you think there's something that's been really useful, or the other speakers might be referring to programs and interventions that are available. In the mental health and wellbeing space, we've obviously got the framework. We've late last year released the new updated suicide postvention guidelines. And as you're all aware, that includes if there's been a suicide of a student or family of a student, that to contact SWIS, and they will support you through the postvention. It is online. It's a guideline for across all 3 systems. We have been working for some time, and Angela reminded me too long, on guidelines around responding to self-harm, suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So we've done quite a lot of consultation and recently been doing an Aboriginal consultation around those issues, and we hope that they will be released in term 3. And then there's a range of programs. So there's the whole school approach to wellbeing. We have a strong partnership with BU. Some schools do choose to be what's called a BU school and develop plans. Some link that to their trauma-informed schools. Some use that as a planning around a range of wellbeing activities as well. The wellbeing engagement collection data, you may have seen, I think this week there's been emails going out, and we also circulated it on the Wellbeing Information Network. So we run a Moodle and release information and share information around wellbeing, that there's new applications to help the data analysis of WEC. And so if you haven't seen that, I understand System Performance will be running some webinars and training, and we've been talking to them about them doing some training with different partnership groups as well So that has just been released. I haven't actually, it's a new Power BI function, so I'm not sure who might have seen that. But obviously the aim of that is to make sure that the wellbeing data comes back to you in a way that you can really use it to sort of monitor and plan your wellbeing responses in schools as well. We support free youth mental health first aid training for all student wellbeing leaders. And Swiss is obviously a port of call for wellbeing or mental health advice as well, if you sort of really want to look at what are the referral pathways for different supports that you might need as well. In the attendance area, I just want to highlight that so you're aware that support services offer have a social worker truancy service. There is a new service as well called the Education Family Conferencing Service. So that's a service that the support services can refer families to. It's voluntary, but it's independently facilitated by the courts administration, brings everyone together with the child, with the family, with advocates to talk about what would be helpful in this space, try to empower the families to sort of look at what are the barriers and are there ways to support them to support that child coming to school. So that's a relatively new service. So you could contact Engagement Wellbeing, the attendance team, or support services, truancy social workers around that service as well. There's a local policy implementation tool, the LPIT, which is a way to do your online planning around your attendance policy. And also the social worker duty line is a great source of advice too around attendance and truancy issues as well, and really is a place to go if you're concerned about a student not being at school, to ring up Swiss and have a conversation with them as well. The student behaviour. The behaviour support policy is out, and there's a range of resources that go with that. Some of those are in support services like the behaviour coaches. There's the behaviour support toolkit, which was developed through our team, and there's been a lot of training around positive support recently as well. And then I think Link ED, there was advice about some new bullying prevention resources that have just been released. So there's a range of those. There's videos, there's stuff around cyberbullying and guidance and things as well. So certainly if you go onto the internet and look around bullying prevention, there are now, I think they've just released this week, a lot of resources around bullying prevention as well that have just been released. Trauma-informed practice is quite a strong area. A number of you might be trauma-informed or trauma-aware schools with support from Berry Street or one of the other providers as well. And I know Julie's school is, I think, so she'll be talking about some of how that works in practice. I'm also aware that Berry Street's recently been going to the APY lands and delivering training on trauma-informed practice to some of the schools up there, the teachers up there as well, which is really needed. And there's the ongoing SMART training, which is a really important way to understand some of the link between trauma and behaviour and how schools can sort of respond in a safe way to that behaviour for every child, because we don't always know what might have been going on in that child's life in terms of domestic and family violence at home and other concerns as well. And then child protection and wellbeing, the big thing I want to flag is that the responding to risk of harm, abuse and neglect training, which is the mandated, which used to be called RAN-EC and now is RRHAN, RAN-EC, is being released on the 1st of July. That means all staff need to do a refresher on a 2-hour online course. And so further information, a lot of further information will be going out after the 1st of July about that course. A lot of effort went into updating it to make sure it was using the most up-to-date evidence and working with other government partners. And that particular training is for volunteers as well, for all education staff. So that will be released on the 1st of July. Caroline talked about keeping safe child protection curriculum. I think it's really exciting that we're having also worked in sexual health for many years, having a bigger focus around healthy relationships, respectful relationships, and how that can be delivered to students in a supportive way that really does meet their needs as well. So I think it's really great that the student voices come through really clearly around their needs around those issues as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as a result of that. And of course, separate to us is the child wellbeing practitioners, but who are a source of referral if you've got a family that you're really worried about, but maybe below that statutory child protection threshold. And how am I going? And I'm just finishing up now with which is really quite timely because the students with functional needs are going to be subject to the other panels with a lot more detail that they're going to, Lindley and Di and others will be talking much more about ISPP and planning. I'm going to stop. But I do want to just mention, that my area also has a gender diverse, intersex and sexually diverse student policy and programs and support, and we are seeing more referrals for support around those concerns or issues for young people. So just to know that you can contact Engagement Wellbeing, look at the procedure online, but if you want extra advice you can contact someone in my team who can walk you through some of the complex issues around school camps and what to do in certain situations. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to hearing what the others say. Thanks.
I'm too lazy to get up. I'm not getting up. I'm too lazy. I like sitting down for a day. So I'm Julie Murphy. I'm the principal of Elizabeth Vale Primary School. I'm talking to you this morning a little bit about our journey to be a trauma-informed school. So our school motto, rules, whatever you want to call them, is be kind, work hard and read lots. A little bit about my school's context. So all schools are really complex. We like to think that ours is a little bit extra tasty. So we're a Category 1 school. Our ICSIA is within the bottom 7 percentile of Australia. Currently, and I did this on Saturday, so it's changed already. I've enrolled 4 students this week, but last week we had just under 480 kids. I have 18 mainstream classes, 3 intensive English classes, 2 special classes, a school-based preschool. We host 3 special classes from Adelaide North Special School. Currently we sit at about 90% school card. We have 68% of our students who are learning English as a second language. 154 of my cherubs are humanitarian refugees. We had 76, we now have 79 Aboriginal learners. We have 70 children who are funded through ISCP, and obviously we do internal funding as well. And when I did this, we had 16 children who were under care orders. And unfortunately for some of our kids, they're in commercial care or residential care. And I guess giving you the context of my school is really about understanding that for us, we're probably 3 in 4 around a functional need analysis. So we can't work necessarily at the wave 2 and 3 level for some of the work we do. It has to be for all. So we started a journey to become what we're calling a trauma-informed school quite some time ago, about 2014, through the positive psychology, positive education, which many people engaged in. We began thinking deeply about what we could do differently because, as you will know, it's not rocket science, but there is significant connections between adverse childhood experiences and the functional needs of our students in our schools. We use the adverse child experiences to help us understand our children, help us try to work through what might be their functional needs, do some hypothesising and analysing what might be going on for them. So our data tells us that 90% of our learners have experienced at least one of the adverse childhood experiences, 75% have experienced at 3 to 5, and 15% have experienced more than 5. That's a pretty significant piece of data for our school, and it's not data that at the moment our system uses or collects, but for us it's really important for us to profile our kids in a whole range of ways. And obviously the more of these type of experiences we have, the greater the risks around disengagement, health, and having unsuccessful experiences in schools. So in my school, the big ones have really been, there's significant amount of substance use in my community. Household violence is high. We have 19 houses in the area that are actually short and medium accommodation for domestic violence victims. The nature of Category 1 schools is also about transgenerational trauma. You can't ignore the fact that this happens and the impact of generation after generation of marginalisation and what that does to our families. High transients. This term we've enrolled 26 children and said goodbye to 7. As I said, my school's 90% school card. That's a significant, poverty is a significant adverse childhood experience. And through having many, many children who have come to Australia through war and displacement from their own countries, my predictions are that that's going to be a greater impact on the other side of COVID when we are able to support and welcome children back who need to be safe. The impact of what COVID will have on top of what's already happening for our humanitarian refugees is some work for the future. So there's no debate that we need to be a trauma-informed school. So for us, what that means, our, I guess, wave 1 work that we do for all means that daily we are very, very intentional in our work to move our children from what we talk about being their feeling brain to their thinking brain. Along our journey, our staff have gone through lots of learning around neuroscience, attachment theory. Currently, a few of us are learning about epigenetics. Lots of things that unfortunately the LGU and COW and other places can't help us with. So I will say that we've done a lot of this researching through other avenues. We've actually connected quite heavily with health. We're only 200 metres from the Lowell McEwen Hospital, so we're quite lucky we've had some connections there. And what I would say is we're not changing our children, we're changing our staff. So the biggest impact in our school has been my staff's capacity to be able to be more responsive and more trauma-informed in how they support children. So we do a whole lot of things, which I'm sure lots of schools do, but some of the work we do is we're very, very intentional about understanding cortisol levels in our children, understanding about resting heart rate, and we do things all day, every day, where we are intentionally working on lowering children's heart rates. We do that through the way we set up our environments. We do that through the sounds that we create around our environments. We control what we can control in the school environment. We can't use a post-traumatic response to trauma because our children haven't had an event necessarily. This is about their lives. We know that many of our children are coming in during the day, and throughout the day they are in their brainstem. The way they are functioning, the way they're able to access the world is right down at survival. You cannot, neurologically, you cannot learn synthetic phonics when you are in that space. So we have to be really intentional to do what we can do to try and move children through those stages. So we have to do emotional literacies. They are just as much as synthetic phonics. Emotional literacies, teaching our children to be able to understand their bodies and their brains so that they can start to take as much control as well. We actually have heart rate monitors on lots of children, and we're trying to teach them to use strategies, and when your heart gets to this certain, when the monitor says you're at this space, then come back and we can start the learning. We still have lots and lots of very tasty moments with lots of children. This is not some sort of quick fix. It's a daily grind, and it's how we set up our school all day, every day. And one of the complexities for us is that it increases the learning agenda for our staff. So our starting base. So, I'm a Category 1 school, so I'm well funded. However, like everybody, I can always do more. So my starting base, my wave 1 space, how I use the base funding, the base what we get to try and do some of this work for all is we try really intentionally to have lower class sizes. I'm aware of the effect size research, but that's not unique to Category 1 schools in my context. In my context, smaller class size matters because the relationship and the connection with an adult from an attachment theory perspective makes a difference to my kids. We are trauma-informed in our facilities. Every time we are doing upgrades, a lucky school, I'm getting a big upgrade. I'm having lots of arguments around contemporary learning versus trauma-informed learning environments. They don't always match. So we're having to do lots of conversations about some of our kids actually need closed off smaller spaces. Contemporary learning models don't necessarily like that idea. So we have to advocate differently for our children. So everything we're doing, our playgrounds, we are putting in equipment that provides our children to have pattern repetitive movements because we understand what that does around regulation. We buy in additional services. I have a full-time speech pathologist. I have a 0.2 clinical psychologist. Massive impact in our school. And they don't work with children, they work with staff. They're coaches to improve my staff's capacity. Workforce development is the key of our work. We have a very culturally diverse staff. We have our own targets for Aboriginal employment and our own targets for Bhutanese employment because there's significant cohorts in our school. We're very fortunate, we're a national community hub, so we get funded to help support our families. One of the really interesting pieces of research is one of the greatest factors that influence the outcomes of a 15-year-old child's literacy is their mother's education. So we work with our mothers as part of our core work. We have a really strong density around leadership. We ensure that every single teacher in our school has a coach, and that coaching is around supporting them for all of their work, including how to be a trauma-informed practitioner. And then we do lots of the add-ons like other schools. We have Play for 10, that's an initiative to support 10-year-olds find a sense of connection and belonging with community. There's a lot of research that says if at 10 years old you can find connection and belonging, that will help your connections and belongings in the future. We have building, and it's still growing, a school orchard. My community is really clear about they don't want to have all charities continually providing food for our children, but we also know that fruit often costs more than chips. So we're building sustainable things within the school that the community become more self-determining. We run lots of parent workshops, particularly for our parents who are newly arrived to Australia, to try to understand how to work in this system. They look in lots of ways. Sometimes parent workshops is sitting outside on the ground. It's not anything like this. We do books in homes, so we used to have a sponsor, but now we sponsor ourselves so that every child in our school gets 3 books 3 times a term that goes home. We are doing eye checks in our school. We did them yesterday. We had 200 children checked yesterday, and from that, I wrote it down, 82 need follow-up. Follow-up doesn't necessarily mean they need glasses. In my experiences, doing the checks is the easy part. The follow-up, the helping children get glasses, maintaining they've still got those glasses in 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years' time, is actually the hard work that we do in schools. Interestingly, my understanding is Aboriginal kids actually are given more health checks, immunisations than any other cohort. It's the follow-up and the continuity that's the hard work. We also have dental program. So many of my children have horrendous pain because of dental issues. That impacts on learning. And like everybody, we provide food for our children. We do it in ways that is hopefully not taking away my expectations that parents, that's your job, not mine. But if someone's hungry, we feed them. It's that simple. And then, didn't even tell Carolyn I was going to say this, but we invest very heavily in the early years. Our AEC data, like the state, shows that our children have come to school even more vulnerable than before. I've been at the school for 9 years. A long time ago, I was a teacher there. So I've been in the community for over 20 years, and it is changing. It is different. And I will say that the impact of meth has made a massive difference to the community. What that's done neurologically to our children's brains, we're still learning about. But we do a playgroup. Playgroup is non-negotiable in our school. It always has been. We find the space for it. We need to be connecting with our family as early as possible. We are really explicit. I have a school-based preschool. We start explicitly teaching literacy relentlessly. We can't wait for our children. They're coming to us with experiences that are very, very culturally rich, but not necessarily aligned with what we expect in schools for growth. And the other thing is all of the children in my reception cohort are receiving some sort of intervention support. So we go in early. In fact, next year we've already decided that we're starting intervention term 2 in the preschool. So this is our base. This is what we would say is our wave 1. Every child is supported to become what we call ready to learn. And we can't do that when they come in the door. We do it constantly throughout the day. Under time. Thank you.
I might go up there just so I can see this one go out. Thank you.
And I have put a copy of our case study on the table for anyone that's interested in knowing. It's a little bit, took a year to get published, but if anyone else is interested in it, I can send you the link.
Wow, that's a tough one to follow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maciej Jankowski. If you tried to pronounce my name, unless you have Polish heritage, you would struggle because it is very, very ethnic. Now, maybe I'll go. Great, my slide's up there. Thank you. Now, I know you've been listening for probably 45 minutes, so I might do something that Julie probably does in her schools a lot, which is a brain break. Many of you would be familiar with it. You don't have to move for this. But what I'll ask you to do is just to put your hands up like this, and then with your right hand, get this finger going forward, and then thumb up on the other one. And when I say switch, the trick is to go like that. Now, you lose if you make a pistol, or if you have 2 thumbs up or fingers pointing at each other. So we'll start off slow. Switch, switch. That was slow. All right, let's start again. Switch, switch, switch. All right, now we're gonna do a competition. There's a prize for the winner. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for that. Right. I should probably tell you why I'm here. So I work at John Pirie Secondary School as the deputy principal. Roger Nottage, our principal, who is retiring at the end of this year, got the invite. However, I work with a very strong team around inclusive education, well-being, and alternative learning models at our site. So I got the Guernsey, and I'm very intimidated. So the why. Our vision at John Pirie is to build better futures for all. And this is a challenge because we are very much in the early years of actually trying to figure out how to make it a whole school approach. When I came into the school 7 years ago, FALD, as we call it, Faculty of Learning Difficulties, was 1 special options class and 1 alternative SACE class, but it was very much segregated. Hey, that's you guys. And I do have 2 of my leaders here with me. They don't want me to embarrass them, but I will. Robin and Emma, who are sitting over there at that table. And they've been responsible for a lot of the changes that have happened. So when I came into the deputy role 3 years ago, the idea was that we have to grow the profile and we have to recognize, like Caroline said, that this is everyone's business. And for us, probably similar to Julie, we're 2 to 4 or 2 out of 4, maybe 3 out of 4 in some classes, and that's in mainstream. So it is quite complex. As I said, this has probably been a 3-year journey, so forgive me, this isn't going to be as polished as what Julie is doing. So our context, we're a Cat 2 school. Realistically, we should be Cat 1. We were the 7 to 12, one of the 7 to 12 trial schools, and I'm really glad that we did that, even though we had 120 extra kids in 2019. If we had to go through that right now, we would be struggling. Our enrollments are 700 plus, 100 staff, about 50-50 split between teachers and support staff, but our turnover is 20%, almost every single year. So again, what Julie was saying about upskilling staff and that development, that is so fundamental for us, and we're not doing it perfectly yet, but we're working on it. 20% ATSE and 18% IESP funded students. Now, interestingly, we just completed our NCCD data collection, and 71% of our students across the school are receiving some sort of an adjustment. Now, that's not all of them with learning difficulties. And as part of the middle school focus, our QDTP is focusing on self-regulation across all 7 to 8 students. So every single one of them has a little thing on their desk that is supposed to help them in that space. Now, really, we probably should be doing that across the school because there's some year 12s who need to learn how to self-regulate still. Some of our challenges, and I'm not listing all of them, you guys would be probably facing many others as well. But understanding our students, that has been a challenge. Historically, we would look at their what were they called before? NEPs, thank you. And then we would just look at NAPLAN results, PAT results, and that would be it. So we needed to start looking at different diagnostic models, and we're working in that space. One plans became very, very important for us, and that has given us a language to use with our staff to talk about how are they understanding their students. The functional needs, that was a new term for a lot of our guys. Now, many of you would have been using that for a long time, but it's still fairly new at John Pirie. Wellbeing and differentiation. I wouldn't say they're not in our site improvement plan. Writing is, but those two need to be. So without it being in the SIP, our team is working on trying to on making that happen, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Communication. Because of our size, sharing the information about the needs of students is paramount. We use something called DayMap. We're fairly fortunate to be able to afford that, but you still have some teachers who would work with 100 students in one day if they have 5 different classes. So that's the other complexity of a high school setting. We probably aren't collaborating K to post-school partners as well as we could. So that's something else that we need to improve. And as for many of you would know, rural context, it's sometimes hard to find professionals to come in. So we had money set aside to have a speechy come in 1 day a week. We couldn't hire anybody. So it's, it's something that we recognize we need to do, but it's just not happening at this stage. Now, I'll talk a little bit about some of our initiatives. That's just a list of the ones I will discuss in detail, or in a little bit of detail. But there is many, many others. And I suppose for us, the challenge is between balancing what are we going to be doing as a whole school where everybody's on board versus what are specific groups going to go narrow and deep in that is their core business. Now, one of the things that we recognized was that our funding was not very well distributed, I will say. So when we first started, 100% of all money that came in through ISP was just going to SSOs. That was it. And so what we recognized that no one was actually working with them on development of these plans to support the functional needs of students. And we would be leaving it up to a first-year graduate to go talk to them about someone with autism with no background, no experience. So what we did is we took 15% and we said, right, this is for our leaders, so they got additional release. We were then able to also release staff, work with them more collaboratively, trying to upskill them, and then meet with our SSOs. So then also we started a new initiative this year where all of our SSOs are asked to come to one of our two staff meetings a term, where they will sit down with the teachers that they work with to talk about, okay, how do we support these high-end students? We found that to be quite useful. The SSOs that work in special options classes, because of the nature of working one-to-one most of the time, they don't need to come. This is more for the mainstream class teachers and SSOs. So we've set aside that money. We also set up what we call the ISP executive, which includes members from Fold, Mainstream, and Wellbeing. And we're working on bigger picture agenda for the school. So step 1 was making sure we had money to actually work with our SSOs. Step 2 was hiring SSOs on time. There would be instances where students would not get an SSO supporting them until term 2. And we said that's not acceptable. So this year we met our target, and every single student that needed support had it day 1. So that was a good outcome. Now, program matrix, I should have called that student profiles. Because the other thing, as part of understanding our students, we sat down over a couple of days and we went through all the data that we had, looking at literacy and numeracy, learning difficulties, well-being, and social emotional needs of our students. And we started with only IASP students. And we created this matrix where we would have their names, all those programs or their needs. And then we had this other spreadsheet that included wave one intervention around literacy, wave one intervention around numeracy, wave two literacy numeracy. You get the picture. So it's a big document. And then we recognized we can't deliver most of those programs. Either we don't have the skills, we don't have the experience, we don't have the time. So that wasn't me, was it? No, that's not the ding yet. Good. But it's something that has been a significant piece of work for us to understand where those needs are. So now the journey begins on either upskilling our staff or getting experts into the school to help us grow our capacity to be able to deliver them at the different waves. So an example is Emma runs a RAGE program for those students who have really high social and emotional needs. Really, we call them the SBM students because they get suspended a fair bit. And it's because they just can't handle conflict with other students. So by being part of that program, that has increased their attendance, decreased SBM. Now, here are some outcomes that we have achieved. So timely staff allocation, I've mentioned that. We also created a new role, which is the mainstream learning difficulties coordinator. So their main focus has been on supporting staff with updating or developing one plans, going into the classrooms, co-teaching, running training for our staff, but that has also been opened up to the partnership because we recognize if we can get them doing what we're doing, then we're all going to be pulling in the same direction. We have an executive team. Emma has brought Berry Street to John Pirie 2 years ago. And this year was the first year where we had the entire staff actually trained in it, and there's a 4-year plan to continue that. And as part of our staff meetings, she does one of those brain breaks so that people remember it's something that they get to practice and then go use it in the classroom. So that's been really effective. And despite all the challenges, our SACE results are through the roof. We've been growing every single year in terms of the outcomes, both at February enrollments and October. So we're almost catching up to the state, which is a pretty big deal for John Pirie. Now, specifically in the Fold faculty, we've had 100% SACE completion for a few years. Also, our Aboriginal students have been between 90 and 100% over the last 5 years, which is excellent work and testament to the hard work of all of our staff. Now, where to next? So we need to stay the course, but probably I need to add we need to clarify the course as well. We don't have a very clear 3-year plan in terms of how we're going to roll all of this out. We've done a lot of this back leg work, but now we just need to put it all together into something clear, a one-pager we can just hand to a new person who comes in, be like, look, this is where we're going. There's a lot more stuff underneath this, but you just need to at least understand the vision. Team around the child is something that we're working towards. We're not there yet, but we recognize the need, and it's probably informal. Like every single student would have support people, but we need to write it down so we are clear about when you come into this role, these are the students you would be supporting. Strengthening our induction program, like I said, with 20% turnover, we need to make sure that those people who are arriving at our school are supported and upskilled so they're able to support all of our students. We're not very good at diagnostic testing. You sort of assume as a high school teacher that kids are going to come knowing how to read and write and do their maths, which isn't the reality. So we're working with our English and maths coordinators to come up with a consistent way to support students or at least diagnose where their needs are in terms of literacy and numeracy. And also, I think that came from a visit that Robin made to one of the other sites in Adelaide. And then seek out experts. So we've gone to Craigmore, Para Hills. We're looking to work with Golden Grove because they're doing some amazing things. But also we need to look in our own backyard. So connecting with primary schools, tapping into their experts. The challenge for them is that they don't have the size and the funding that we do. So our structure at our site, we have 19 leaders. Most of the primary schools in Port Pirie might have 1 to 3, which makes it difficult for them to be released. So we're working on that. I was really pleased to listen to Caroline this morning and what Rick was going to say because it genuinely sounded like some of the concerns that we're talking about, you're probably thinking about, they're aware of. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And so I'm really excited to see what that work is going to look like. And early years are very important. Primary years are very important. And then we get the result of what the hard work that you guys are doing, the teachers in the classrooms are doing when they come to high school. And I suppose our vision is to make that as seamless as possible and continue to learn the best we can, because we're very much in the early stages, so that we can support the functional needs of all of our students. Thanks very much for your time.